Great to have you all here. We are talking today with Bronwyn Nash. We're going to be exploring clean coaching. So it's a real pleasure to have you here with us, Bronwyn, to join in one of our Animas conversations. And as we go through our conversation today, I just invite you all to share any questions that you have in the chat box, and we'll be kind of just dipping in and out of there just to see what it is that you would like to ask or to share with Bronwyn as we go through. So I've currently got you all on mute, and we'll probably keep it that way just to help with the flow of the conversation, but I'm sure we'll kind of take it as we go. So first of all, I'd like to just welcome Bronwyn into the space. Welcome, Bronwyn.
Hi, Rob. Great to be here. I'm very excited about having this chat with you.
Cool. So let's just start with how are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm doing okay. I thought it might be a bit of a back to work day, but that's not how it's panned out. So it's actually been quite a nice, I've got the house to myself day.
Nice.
Yeah, so this is kind of the only bit of work related stuff that I've done today, actually. So that feels quite nice.
Oh, cool. Okay, so we're here to talk about clean coaching. It was quite amusing at the beginning of our conversation. I kept calling it clean language, and then you was like, oh, we're actually talking about clean coaching. So to frame this up for everybody, can you—
Don't say that. Everyone's turned up wanting to talk about clean language, and now they're going to be like, oh, it's not that anymore, I'm off.
Can you sort of just frame up for us what is clean coaching?
Yes, so clean coaching is a bringing together of clean language, which, you know, the work of David Grove that he developed when he was working as a therapist, working with a lot of trauma patients, and recognizing that patients in therapy that had experienced trauma found it easier to talk about their experiences in metaphor, and also that metaphor just automatically showed up a lot in what they were saying in their therapy sessions. So he developed clean language as a way to work with those metaphors and that symbology, but without there being a huge amount of bias introduced by the facilitator.
Okay.
So that's clean language. And so after he developed that, he then went on to develop a whole other set of processes that sit under the banner of something called emergent knowledge. And it's those processes plus clean language that come together and are kind of called clean coaching. His work was further developed by a couple of NLP specialists, James Lawley and Penny Tompkins, who were fascinated by the way that he worked and went in and actually modeled him. So they used the NLP approach of modeling to figure out what he was doing and how he was doing it. Their minds were blown by it, and then they worked with him to create clean coaching. So bring it from the therapy world into the coaching space.
And what did you say, emergent knowledge? Tell me a bit about emergent knowledge.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I'm really torn as to which side of clean coaching kind of I love the most, because clean language is amazing, but I think it probably is the emergent knowledge, because that's the place where the physical movement and the drawing and the objects and the what feels to me like huge amounts of creativity start to come in. And emergent knowledge is the idea that David Grove kind of talks about clients coming to the coaching and wanting to get from point A to point B. And the client is at point A, the destination, the outcome, the goal is at point B. And they are thinking in quite a linear way, like a straight line way. Yeah. Like, how do I get from point A to point B? But generally they've spent ages trying to figure that out already. And the kind of the field of their awareness around that whole piece of A to B, he calls C, so A, B, C, and that's kind of like the thinking that the client is using. That's the resources that they're accessing, the information that they've decided is useful and relevant, and it's kind of locked down within that boundary of C. And so emergent knowledge is about really inviting the client outside of that space into the space around it, through lots of different tools and approaches and exercises and invitations, and starting to connect. I can't remember the words that he uses, but it's almost like the weak links. He's looking for the weak links rather than the strong links between points of information, and often that's where huge amounts of hidden information lies. So these questions and these processes basically connect the client to huge amounts of data and information outside of their current field of awareness. And at some point, there's like a tipping point, where knowledge, their inner knowing, their knowledge, their resources starts to emerge. And it's kind of like the weird magical interface between science and magic, because there's all the neurology that's going on in terms of the neural networks that are being joined up and created, and the system that's being created outside of their previous field of awareness. But then this magic thing happens where suddenly two bits that were never connected before are suddenly connected, and something brand new emerges. And I can't remember who quoted this, but someone out there has said that the definition of creativity is when you put two things together that seem to have no relationship with each other and create something new.
So that's incredibly fascinating. As you were talking about that, it reminded me of the work that I used to do with Matilda when I still work with creative partnerships back in the olden days. And one of the exercises that we used to do was to send groups out to go and find two objects. And they had to bring these two objects together and find a way to fuse these two objects to create a new object, to create a new thing. And in the creating of a new thing, it would spark new ideas, new imagination, new ways of working. And then sometimes we would get that new thing and somebody else's new thing and then bring those together to create something else. And as you were talking, it kind of reminded me of this way of sort of taking things that we haven't thought about yet and focusing on those things and then seeing how they then connect into what we're thinking about.
Yeah, to use a metaphor, it's like, you know when you're kind of really trying to solve a problem and you're really stuck and you're thinking about it, and nothing's shifting, and then you go for a walk, you just walk away from it, and you just go for a walk, and suddenly just by walking away from it and doing something else and surrounding yourself with different symbols and being in a different space, the answer just comes, it emerges. And it's a bit like that. It's like kind of going for a walk and solving the problem that you could not solve when you were sat at your desk.
It's interesting because as you're talking, I can kind of see these links in my mind's eye and this kind of static electricity firing off in lots of different directions until they kind of connect and go, oh, that's a nice connection. Let's see what that brings. And I guess that's partly what we do as coaches when we're asking those questions that somebody hasn't heard before, to get them thinking in a different way, to get a different perception into the space.
Yeah.
So what got you into the clean coaching, Bronwyn?
There was a bit of a trail of breadcrumbs. I feel like I want a buzzer beside me that I can just hit every time there's a metaphor in the space, like metaphor.
I think we need to name them. Somebody needs to get a little bell.
Because someone just like, Yeah, can we have like a Mexican wave of everybody every time you hear a metaphor? Where was I? So yeah, a bit of a trail of breadcrumbs. So I was already into using creativity in my coaching, using image cards, imagery, objects. I then came across an association for coaching online training that was all about the magic of metaphors, and I did that training, got more interested in it, and then I saw another association for coaching online training. This time it was about clean coaching, and it was a bit of an introduction to clean coaching, so I did that. The lady who was running that was offering a much more deeper and broader training, foundation and then advanced, and I started. My appetite was whet enough to look into that and think about whether that was something that I wanted to do. And it was when I was reading the blurb that went with that training, that I got completely hooked. And so the training was made up of 2 foundation modules and 2 advanced modules. And you had to do the foundation modules before you were allowed to do the advanced modules. And it was the stuff in the advanced modules around emergent knowledge that just hooked me, because they were talking about things like, I was going to learn how to use processes called things like clean spinning, clean networks, clean space. And the one that totally hooked me was clean hieroglyphs. And I was just like, whoa, what is that? That sounds epic. Clean hieroglyphs. And it was all about, how, were you just about to ask me what it was? Yeah. See? Yeah, it's all about getting the client to write and draw on a piece of paper, and then start to examine in real detail, like paying real attention to the marks that they've made on the page, and to the spaces on the page and the shapes that are on the page. And it's almost like inviting, those magic eye pictures where you have to kind of get it to a certain distance and then you see something hidden in the picture. It's almost inviting the client to get something down on paper and then almost do that with it. So kind of like let their brains go fuzzy. Do you get what I mean? Like, let your brain go fuzzy and see what you start seeing, not just the words or the intention behind the words or the drawing, but the lines, the shapes, the symbols. Oh, that looks like a snake, or that letter T is a massive capital and that one isn't. And that again takes them into a new realm of awareness and information, and it's just phenomenal what happens.
So I love when things sort of connect and come together. And as you were talking about that, it reminded me of some work I did with Simon Weston, where he got you to create maps of your connections, and you sort of would. I think I did my family, and you sort of write people's names down, and you kind of draw a straight line for a connection, and 2 lines for a strong connection, and a dotted line or a staggered line, and then you would kind of border people that were together, and you kind of play around with this, and he gave you some symbols to kind of start with and to kind of get you into the flow of it. And then you'd spend maybe half an hour on your own just kind of creating this map on a large piece of paper. And then you'd stick it up on the wall, and you'd invite a coach to come and work with you, and you'd view it as a piece of art and go, now I'm looking at this piece of art. What does it say to me? What am I noticing in this? And all of a sudden, you start to see patterns and shapes and metaphors within the work that hadn't been there consciously as you were doing it, but that emerge into the space. And I love that, how these different ways of using that kind of emergent knowledge sort of exist.
Yeah, I've got this pair of glasses that I got from a festival, and when you put them on, the whole world goes fuzzy, and it's full of heart-shaped rainbows. Do you know the sort of thing I mean? And that clean coaching is a bit like that. You're kind of inviting your client to put this pair of glasses on and just look at their world in a completely different way that might be really unfamiliar and might not make any sense to begin with. But there's different information there. And as you were talking there about mapping out your networks and putting it up on a map, what clean coaching does, and I think what that process does as well, is it's an antidote to the deleting and the distorting and the generalizing that we tend to do. Because when we pay such exquisite attention to what the client is saying or what they're creating on their page, or really naming it and getting it down, we can't, the client stops being able to delete and distort and generalize, and all this extra information is brought into the space, which then, you know, as we know from like narrative coaching, when new information comes into the space, the story has to change to accommodate it. So yeah, it's an amazing way of kind of countering that tendency that we have to delete and distort and generalize.
Because I guess also because we're sort of coming from an unconscious space, because we're not thinking about it cognitively, we don't filter it. It's just going to come in to the space, and we're going to go, oh, that's there. So that kind of makes me think about how might you begin a clean coaching conversation. What's the start to them? So I can imagine that people that are listening are going, okay, this all sounds fascinating, but how does one even start with this?
So there's a demonstration on Connect of me doing a clean language session with Nick in Edinburgh. And that kind of demonstrates what I'm about to say in terms of how we start. And we can start the same way with all of clean coaching, or sometimes if we're doing the emergent knowledge stuff, we might start a little bit differently.
Can you do it on me?
Do it on you.
Me.
Yeah,
God,
yeah.
God.
So the key question, and I love this question, I use it all the time now, whether I'm doing clean or not, is what would you like to have happen?
I love that question.
And
I use that question loads as well.
Yeah.
Great question.
And it's a beautiful question because it's got 3 questions in one. And the pauses are so significant in clean, because when we pause, the client's mind is still working. So that question, what would you like? That's a question. Their brain starts working on that. What would you like to have is another question, and their brain starts working on that. What would you like to have happen is a third question. So what comes then can be so rich. So that is how I start the majority of my coaching sessions now, regardless of whether I'm using clean or not. One of the absolute diamonds that this training has given me is something called the PRO model, which I'm not going to try and like explain in its entirety because I'll end up training, but look it up. It's amazing. And PRO stands for problem, remedy, or outcome. And it comes from the work of James Lawley and Penny Tompkins. And the question, what would you like to have happen? Sometimes, if your client is extremely well behaved, will generate an outcome, a goal or an outcome of something they would like to have happen. But often what happens is you say, what would you like to have happen? And they'll tell you what the problem is. Or they'll tell you what the problem is and what their proposed remedy to the problem is. And it's really easy to get caught up in coaching the problem or coaching the remedy without ever getting clear around what is it that they actually want to have as an outcome here. And that process has just that on its own has been amazing in my coaching. just being able to get to the outcome and have that conscious awareness about, am I coaching the problem, am I coaching the remedy, or am I coaching the outcome? And to knowingly be able to navigate that territory.
Because it reminds me of in narrative, when we get caught in the client's story. So we're no longer an observer of what's taking place to ask questions, to create awareness, where we're in it, we're in the story, and then all of our bias around the story and our collusiveness starts to exist in it, because we're caught up in the tale, which is really interesting. You're talking about, you know, what am I coaching here? What am I working on here? And am I aware of that? And it's interesting when you were talking about, you know, what would you like to have happen? My brain was kind of whirring around that idea of space. And I guess that's very related to where we are right now in this kind of time and space, where a lot of us are kind of in our homes, and that's where we're staying, and we're doing our one walk a day, or we're wandering around our gardens or on our balcony. And I feel like I've lost the sense of space and spaciousness, which is kind of going, oh, that's interesting. I hadn't thought about it like that before really listening to that question.
Oh, Rob, I just want to coach you now.
Go on, you can coach me. What would you ask to that, or where might you take that?
So what I would generally do with that is just develop that metaphor of space a little bit. So I'd use a few questions like, what kind of space is that space? And you'd say
it's got lots of air to it. It's very, very open.
And it's got lots of air to it, and it's very open.
Yeah.
And is there anything else about that space when it's got lots of air to it and it's very open?
It's kind of it's welcoming, and it's that kind of cloudy whitey blue color.
Cloudy whitey blue color, an opening. And can you capture that on your whiteboard in whatever way feels right to you?
Okay. So
it could be words, drawings, images, symbols, whatever way feels right to you.
Yeah, I guess there's lots of that kind of going on. So that's interesting. That actually, when I start to put pen to paper, it kind of looks like the sea. So I very much felt that it was a cloud when I was describing the qualities of it. But when I look at it, it feels more like it be that openness. You know, when you're on the beach and you get to that point where you can't really see the people around you, and you look out and there's just this mass expanse of water. You can go, oh, look at that. I could just drink that in or dive into it. Not that I do much diving in water, but it kind of has that sense to it. Yeah.
And is there anything else that needs to be on that picture?
Well, I mean, was there anything else that needs to be on that picture? So I'm going to try and not think about it, because as soon as I start thinking about it, I start going, oh, well, there should be some sun and there should be some birds, and that starts to happen. And I go, okay, if I don't think about what's there, there's something here. I don't really know what that is, but there's something here, and it's quite interesting that how this is a very busy and that's very open. So it feels like there's some kind of untangling taking place. And so when I think about space, perhaps I'm thinking about untangling elements of the self and allowing that to be more, there being more spaciousness. Yeah.
Untangling elements of yourself and allowing and spaciousness.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we could do this all day. I'm happy to, but it feels like very quickly. I mean, that was like what, 3-4 minutes?
Yeah.
We're into territory that's just like, wow, what's happening?
Yeah.
Would any of that come with a regular Q&A type coaching session? Maybe.
Maybe. Because yeah, and I think, you know, this is one of the things around you. Whenever I talk to people about clean language, I often talk about that I find it very restrictive. And it doesn't allow me to ask the questions that I want to ask, while at the same time, if somebody said to me, you know, they wanted to create more space, my bias would be like, oh, that does that mean there's things that are really cluttered to them? Whereas mine isn't about clutter for me. It's about a tangledness and untangling is the space, as opposed to something that's cluttered or busy. So that's really interesting how that use of language or dialect created a different way of thinking about it.
Yeah.
I love how much attention you were paying to my physicality. So I'm as you know, and some others might know, that I trained as a mime artist. So I'm really drawn to the physicalness of what's taking place in the space. And so noticing my own physicality being played back to me was really interesting to kind of go, oh yeah, that's what's happening there. And it sort of draws that question of how much as coaches do we dial into the physicality of our client in our day-to-day sessions. And what's beautiful as well is that you were able to do that, and we're on Skype, because we often go, oh, can we do this in this format? But you were able to grab that richness of that physicality in the space.
Yeah, absolutely. And so there's a couple of things I want to ask you, because you said it felt restrictive for you to use it, and I'm really curious whether it felt restrictive to receive it.
It never feels restrictive to receive it. Right. Yeah. and I think that the restrictive to, if I'm honest, I think the restrictive to use it was because I didn't get I was going to say au fait, that's not quite what I'm looking for, familiar with the language enough. I remember working with a guy a couple of years ago, and we did a joint workshop together with some artists. And I did the whole movie stuff, and he did the whole clean language stuff, and we created this project together. And I remember him saying that when he started, it just felt like you were just saying sentences incorrectly. And it got to a point where he didn't even think about it anymore. He was so used to the way that you phrase those clean coaching questions. And he said, sometimes as an observer, you hear the clunky, you hear a perceived clunkiness in the question. But as the receiver, there is no clunk going on. Clunk, a very technical word there.
I love it. Where's the clunk? Yes. So, God, there's a lot of things that I want to respond to in what you've just said. You might have to help me remember them. So, one is the restrictiveness. Oh, Kerry, good. I'm glad you're here, because I was going to talk about my very early experiences when you were my guinea pig. So I'm glad you're here. Yeah, there's the restrictiveness, and then there's the physicality that I want to talk about. Can I talk about the physicality first?
Go for it.
Because I don't want to lose that. So I might actually ask a question of a gesture or a sound rather than a word. So, you know, if my client said something like, oh, yeah, it's like a warm, beautiful sunset. And I might reflect back to them all of that, including the noise, and I might say, what kind of is that? Or I might, you know, you do this a lot, and I might say, and this, and what kind of this is this? And really invite the client's attention to so much more than just their words, including their physical space. There's a bit of research that I mentioned in my article that just blew my mind when I heard about it.
Oh, is that about the divers?
Yeah, so cool. So for those of you who haven't read it, and this is something I learned on my course, that there was this piece of research about how people learn, and they did this experiment where they took some divers down under the water, under the sea, and whilst they were under there, they taught them a new language that none of them had previously knew or studied. And then once they'd had some teaching, they then tested their recall of this new language above the water without the scuba diving element, and then under the water doing the scuba diving in the environment where they learnt the language. And the recall when they were under the water in the environment where they learnt the language was so significantly improved. And it really kind of demonstrated how our surroundings and our environment are metaphors. That, you know, the word metaphor means a container for something precious, and how our environment is full of these containers for information, which I love because it explains how I can go upstairs going, I'm just going to go upstairs and get something. I get up there, totally forget what I was looking for, come back downstairs to the room that I was in when I had the thought, and suddenly it's there again.
Yeah. And I guess this sort of feeds into the stuff that I remember reading Darren Brown's book, and him talking about memory palaces, and how when you create the memories in an imagined palace, you can then go back into that imagined palace and pull the memories from that space, because it becomes a physical space where you're holding these ideas, and you know, if you pick 10 objects around the room and label them 1 to 10, then you can attach memories to those things, and then when you're not in that space, you just need to recall that space in order to remember those objects or that list, which is, I think it's what people that remember cards do at incredible speed in order to do that. And so that's something really interesting about how our environment holds memory for us, which kind of then makes me think about lots of other things about how, if we're in a difficult situation, if we're locked into that physical environment, then it's very hard to break out of our thinking, because the environment can hold our thinking for us as well.
Yeah, let me give you another beautiful clip. This is an emergent knowledge question. So sometimes that can happen, and our client can get really stuck and don't know what to do, and they just keep saying, I don't know, I don't know. Is there a space that knows about X or Y or whatever it is that you could go to now?
Wow, that's an interesting question. Is there a space that knows about that you could go to now?
Yeah. And the client physically moves and goes there. And the next question is, and what do you know from that space there? And it's just phenomenal. I mean, ever since I started training as a coach, I've been blown away by how much people know, how much more people know than they think they do. And previous to this, my go-to way of accessing that was to invite people to guess.
Yeah.
So as soon as I ask people to guess, it kind of removes lots of obstacles, and they can allow their knowing to come to the surface. But this process is just taking it, this emergent knowledge is just taking it to another level, because it's all coming from the client. There is no meaning of these objects or you know, symbols or environments, except the meaning that they're making of it for themselves. So it's all coming from them. But it does feel like magic.
Which, yeah, and it beautifully transcends into that space of, you know, these objects create meaning, but also our worldly experience create meaning. And so what's the meaning that we're making of this, and how do we shift and change and remake that meaning, or reauthor our stories to create new meaning for ourselves or new experiences?
You're such a narrative coach, Rob. How do we reauthor? This is like clean versus narrative in the ring. They're so connected. They're so connected. Clean and narrative.
and I think that when we look at lots of different ways of working, we start to see where they join up, or where they've borrowed ideas or been influenced in different ways to kind of that causes those connections. So
much, and doing this training has deepened my understanding of what I already knew. It, you know, things like TA, transactional analysis. My understanding of that work has deepened significantly as a result of me doing this work.
So there's something interesting here for me that's I guess it's a question about time, or maybe it's a question about timing. And because what I find happens to me often is I read a book, and all of a sudden I understand something else much more than I did before by the reading of that book or by that course. It doesn't teach me about what's in here. It kind of makes me go, oh, I understand that, something else better. And it just, as you were saying that, it made me think about, I wonder if there's timing around our thinking or our development, that it's kind of like these layers come in over time. And I'm not quite sure what I'm trying to explain or say here, but there's just this thing I'm kind of going, is there something about taking our time to expand and deepen our learning without rushing into trying to grab everything and understand everything? I don't, there is no question there. There's just a kind of a flurry of thoughts.
That really reflects my experience. And another of the things that this, you know, this work has given me, I've never done training in pure NLP, so I've never experienced the world of modeling that they do in NLP. So this is the kind of the first time that I've been introduced to that idea of modeling, and that has really helped, and that's kind of how I make sense of it in terms of my system, my network of coaching knowledge and coaching experience and coaching information is being added to through this, you know, through every book I read, every module I train, every client I work with, every training I do for myself. My system is added to, and then new connections get made between those new elements. And that's what I feel is happening. As I learn more about clean coaching, I'm suddenly seeing it's giving me new perspectives on everything else that I already know. So the connection with narrative, the connection with story, the connection with working with parts of ourselves, and how that overlaps with transactional analysis. you know, even the connection with the grow model is just, yeah. And I think it's not that there are hard connections, it's that all these weak connections have suddenly been allowed to form and create, and again it's created that tipping point.
Yeah.
You said about it being restrictive.
Yeah.
When I first started using, so I started with clean when I first started using, and then I just left it there. This is turning into a whole different conversation.
If we were to cut the recording at that point, it'd be just like an episode of EastEnders.
I'm clean now, though, right? When I first started using clean language, because as I did the training, it was foundation clean language, foundation emergent knowledge, and then the 2 advanced. So when I first started practicing with clean language, I found it as the coach so clunky and so restrictive, and this is why I mentioned about Kerry being on the call, because she volunteered to be one of my very early practice clients. And I remember saying to her, like, this is doing my head in, because there's so much in what you're saying that I want to I want to use my unconscious competence. And what I'm trying to do is use my very new conscious competence instead. And it just felt so uncomfortable. One of my strengths as a coach up until that point had been my ability to paraphrase. That's just so not allowed in clean, because by paraphrasing I'm offering something back from a different perspective. It's got my spin on it, you know. And I found it so hard. I remember saying to her, like, this is doing my head in. I don't know if I can handle this. And now it just comes so naturally, and it feels so nice.
It's quite funny, because as you're saying that, it reminded me of when I used to train foundations, and saying to people say, oh, I'm never going to be able to do those questionings like that. And I'm like, but there is a practice process that we need to go through, and that can feel clunky and difficult, but it's through that practice that it then becomes something that's kind of embedded within our system.
Yeah, and it's so great to be the student again, and be going on that very clear, obvious learning journey again for myself of you know, unconscious incompetence through to conscious, you know, unconscious competence. And it's interesting to notice what happens to confidence on that journey, because what I've noticed is that as my competence increases, and my conscious competence increases, I become aware of so much more. My confidence actually decreases. Because I'm suddenly aware of so much more than I was previously. So yeah, that's been interesting, that as my competence has increased, my confidence has actually dipped, but then starts to come back up as it becomes more unconscious, I guess.
Yeah. I guess that's that interesting space when we first start learning coaching. We start to realize there's so much wealth of possibility within the questions that we ask and within the statements that our clients make, and we suddenly go, so where will I go with this? And almost we shrink back through that idea of, I might break somebody, I might say the wrong thing, and then over time we go, oh, wait a minute, this is okay. There's a fluidity to this, and I can trust my learning to shine through and to help me really focus. And so there's a question here about the connections that you made between coaching and TA through clean coaching. And I'm just curious if you can remember back to any of those, what that connection might have been.
one of the processes in emergent knowledge is called clean pronouns, and it's looking at the way that we talk about ourselves and the difference between us talking about I or me or myself or you, and starting to identify those as parts of the self.
Okay.
And as I started to explore that idea, and the idea that and unlike NLP, it's not about integrating those parts into a single whole. It's more about identifying those parts so that each of their objectives and motivations and even their respective ages comes into awareness, and then they can start working together in a different way. So it's almost like team building within an individual. And that idea of I can't tell you exactly what happened because it is outside of my conscious awareness, but there was something around that exploration of working with parts that then joined up with all my awareness of the working with parts when it comes to transactional analysis, that I just started seeing the TA stuff with greater depth and breadth, and seeing how I could actually flow between some of these modalities as well. Nice. I don't know if that's answered the question, but that's the best I've got.
Lovely. And I guess one of my, as we're sort of heading towards the end, maybe I'm not sure if this is my final question, but a question here is we talk about the unconscious and those kind of depths. I sort of go, is there any a danger or worry about that going into those spaces? Because often we talk about working with the conscious mind within coaching or working with people with agency. I'm just curious about your thoughts around that.
Yeah. So on one hand, when we're working with clean, whether it's clean language or emergent knowledge, we are inviting our client to access information that is outside of their current awareness. And if it's outside of their current awareness, it's probably somewhere in either their subconscious or their unconscious. And we're almost inviting our clients to, ideally, this doesn't always happen, it doesn't have to happen, but ideally enter into almost kind of like a daydreamy sort of state where they're just sort of starting to really open to the symbology or the weirdness that might come. I mean, you have the weirdest conversations with your clients when you're doing this work, like really seriously, like it's like dreams, they're just all the symbology and the connections, and when you wake up and you're like, what the hell was that about? We're kind of facilitating our clients through that kind of space. So there is then the kind of the worry of, but am I gonna inadvertently touch on something that is troubling or traumatic or has been suppressed or something like that? And that is the exact reason why David Grove developed these processes, so that we can work in this way, but it is all it's all done with the clients. The client is the one who is driving it, and because it's clean, we're not prodding at things. We're not kind of prodding at things and leading the client to open up things that they don't want to open up. So it's probably this, it's been argued as one of the safest ways to help the client to access those unconscious and subconscious resources, because it really gives the client all of the agency in terms of where they go, how far they go, what they look at, what they want to share, what they identify. So I personally feel like it gives me the permission to work at a depth that up until a couple of years ago I felt was missing from my coaching, because I felt like I didn't have the tools. I didn't have the tools and the capability, which in turn would give me the confidence to be able to work at that depth. Now that I do have the capability and I do have the confidence, I find that working at that depth, or being able to work at that depth, actually takes transformational coaching to another level, really. And I always say to people, other coaches, you know, work within your capability and your confidence, and that is going to be a moving boundary. But in that, I mean, we have to be honest that it doesn't happen very often, but any coaching approach, even grow, could inadvertently touch on something that is difficult. There are no guarantees, but there are lots of I think clean, one of the things we talk about is clean first aid, which is, you know, when you feel that the client is kind of getting hooked into the problem as opposed to the outcome, or when they're getting into a position of like confusion, or I don't know, how can you use clean to just help them to navigate out of that? Clean always works in the here and now, so it's not, there are big distinctions between how it might show up in therapy as opposed to in coaching.
Awesome, brilliant. I reckon we could talk about this forever, but we don't have forever today. So I'm just going to invite people that are either here today, right now listening, or people that listen to the recording. If this is something that has kind of excited you or kind of pulled on your interest around this work, Bronwyn and I, before the call, we were talking about baby running. I say we were. Let me get this really clean and clear. We were talking about it, that Bronwyn might run a workshop around this work. So if people are sort of going, yeah, this interests me, and I'd like to find out more and go a little bit deeper with this and play around with some of these tools, then do let us know. Perhaps posting underneath the invitation to this, or we're going to put this video on the lounge as well in a couple of days' time. So maybe you can post underneath that. But just really welcoming you and inviting you to share your thoughts around this work. What would you like to know more about? What would you like to explore with it? And then we can work together to see if we can create a workshop to kind of explore this in a deeper way. So I would love to thank you. I'm going to thank you. I'm just going to do it. Not think about it. I'm going to do it. So thank you so much, Bronwyn, for sharing your thoughts and ideas around clean coaching and emergent knowledge. It's been really fascinating. Thank you for using me as your guinea pig to do a bit of demonstration on that. It was really interesting to kind of go through that process as well. So it's been a real pleasure, and thank you everybody that's on the call this evening that's posted questions. I'm sorry we didn't get round to all of your questions, but please also feel free to post them in the lounge underneath the video, and we can come back to those questions over time.
Yeah,
so
I'll keep an eye out over the next few days and answer any that I can. And just really briefly, you mentioned about doing this work online. All of the training that I've done has been online training in clean coaching, and as a result, I've, you know, all the practice that I've done with the other coaches has been online. It works so well. It almost kind of creates some safety for the client to really kind of go into themselves and explore their space. It's great in person as well, but yeah, it works brilliantly online.
Beautiful. So thank you so much, Bronwyn. Thank you for everybody that joined us this evening. Take care, stay safe, and catch up with you again soon. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Cheers. Bye.